Hello, welcome to another installation of TechTalk. Mike is back. Tell us what we got, Mike. Mike, come on.
Okay, so we know Milan's had a birthday pretty recently, and let's all face it, Josh looks fantastic for 52. Daniel, well, he sets the baseline for all good-looking people in the world. We know that. But me, I'm turning 44 this year, guys, so I thought we might talk about old surfaces. Of course, I'm only kidding. We're talking about old concrete surfaces. But Josh, I've got a sneaking suspicion it's not just your excuse to talk about, totally repair and grouting again, is it? We know every week Josh just wants to talk about grouting all the time. So it's not just another excuse to talk about grouting, is it, Josh?
No. I'm also going to be talking about GRTs.
Oh.
Which are used with grout. Yeah. No,
so let's delve a bit deeper, mate. Old concrete surfaces, can they be polished?
Well, I guess first it depends on our understanding of concrete and what makes it polishable. A lot of people say to me, it's old concrete or it's soft, can it be polished? When it comes to polishing concrete, what we need is calcium hydroxide, which is the byproduct of the water and cement when they come together, and then they're hydrated, and the byproduct while they're curing is the calcium hydroxide. That's the kind of stuff that holds everything together. That's what we want to react with in order to be able to polish it. So I normally say to people who ask me the question, is it polishable? I say, well, is it falling apart? Because if it's not falling apart, then it's got the presence of calcium hydroxide. There's a very good chance that we could probably do something with that. So the myth that old concrete can't be polished, I'm not buying it. And secondly, the other myth is that old concrete is really easy to polish and get a good finish on. I'm also not buying that too. All right. I mean, Milan, you've worked in Sydney as well, so you've seen some older concrete that we have than what we do in Melbourne, probably. But you are much younger, so I don't know if that affects the older concrete as you've been playing on. So old concrete, the main differences that you'll notice between old concrete and new concrete is probably going to be the materials, to be honest with you. Materials that you'll notice a difference in is we still use a lot of the same aggregates that we used to, although we used to use a lot more river pebbles and larger ones. So that could be, in old concrete, those river pebbles are very, very hard aggregates. They're harder to cut, harder to grind. And then as far as the other components, sand and cement, cement is going to be fairly similar to what it's been for the last few hundred years. We see it these days, a lot of sand substitutes or manufactured sands in our concrete mixes. And that actually has a bit of an effect on our grinding capacity, so our speed and capacity to generate texture. And then, of course, there's additives in the concrete, anti-shrinks and retardants, things of that nature, which are basically plasticizers that fill in all the capillaries, all the gaps between the sand, the cement, and the water content. And so that actually fills in all those gaps. So that has an effect on our polishing capacity too. Milan, you've got a background in grinding some a lot of concrete. Sydney downtown, man, they've got some really old concrete, river pebbles and that sort of stuff. What's been your experience with working with old concrete?
Working with old concrete, I mean, it's a little bit of a mystery. It's materials which were placed in before polished concrete even existed. So it's a bit of a mixed bag on what you're going to get. You might get a really soft slab, or might get a really hard slab, different kind of aggregates, as you mentioned before. So for me, it was always trying to lock in a process when working with these old slabs, because one, I didn't know how much densifier they would take, particularly those softer slabs. So, I could go 2 or 3 times more densifier than your kind of modern 32 MPa slab. So it's always a mixed bag, and understanding which tool is going to work best for that type of slab really goes a long way. So I'm going to say it again, I'm going to drop it, but you have to run a sample when it comes to these soft slabs, and it's the only way to know, because otherwise you're just going in blind, and that's really the only way to get a good result is to run a sample, get a client to approve it, and move forward. Yeah, it's a real mixed bag out there. So yeah, it's going to be a full bag of tricks that you need to sometimes have prepared for the slab you're dealing with.
So once you ascertain what sort of concrete it is, it's just back to the standard principles for modern day. It's the same principles, but you just need to, it could be a very different sort of concrete compared to what we get today, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. The principles still say the same. As you know, you got your fundamentals. Your grouting process shouldn't change all that much, unless you're working on a really, really soft slab. You might introduce, densifier before grouting, things like that. But the overall fundamentals still remain the same. So,
but they didn't have, they didn't have vibrators back then, and they didn't have laser screeds. Come on, surely there's. I want to be married to the idea that there's a difference between old concrete and new concrete, and I want to be able to say that's old concrete. I've got a different price point or a different method for that, and that's new concrete and I have a different price and method for that. Come on, tell me I can do that. It's old concrete. I don't touch it because it doesn't polish, or it's new concrete. I only work with that because it's polishable. Come on, that's what I want to be. I can't beat both here, guys. I want to be one or the other. Can I?
I believe everything's polishable. If it's
Okay.
concrete, if it's concrete, if you're following the right steps, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so Milan, you mentioned that you had to put a lot more densifier in the old concrete, the soft stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen on new concrete as well?
It can happen on new concrete as well. If it's going to be at exactly the same challenges as new slabs, because new slabs, we don't have a perfect environment still to place slabs. So it's not going to change. If anything, the modern slabs might cause you a bit more headaches when it comes to polishing, because of all these additives nowadays that you mentioned, Josh. We're talking about man-made sands and all this stuff going into the mixers, which are going to play on your tools. In the olden days, we just had, sand, cement, and aggregate. Done.
He's 35 years old and he's talking about the olden days. In the olden days we had.
Back in my day.
I guess one of the other things that I think of straight away too is obviously being just purely the age of what you're looking at is that, there's a lot more chance that it could have been susceptible to, to oil stains or previous tiling or previous flooring, and, to have it like an outcome with some ghosting and oil unable to remove. And it's just been around a lot longer and maybe had different tenants passing through and things like that, I guess. So I suppose that would be another thing you'd have to keep a close eye out for.
Well,
yeah, very good point you make, Mike. Very good point, especially when setting the expectation for the customer, what the result's going to be. Very good point.
yeah. Well, for me, the way I look at it, I go to the archives and ask for that batch report from 100 years ago, man. Where's my batch report?
Get the microfiche out.
That's right. It's got like sand, cement, water, aggregate, 11 cigarette butts.
It's an interesting topic because there's so many aspects to it. We've seen this throughout the industry. There was a really good customer up in Coffs Harbour. He was polishing a 100-year-old slab up actually, and as you mentioned at the start there was a size aggregate, like it was actually big rock the size of my hand, and it looked actually really cool. It was an absolute crappy show to get that floor up to its level because the levels were completely like out of spec and things like that. Took a lot of work to really get that floor up to scratch. And what are people finding? Same also for people in South Australia. There's some older buildings there as well that are getting polished, and they have a lot of moisture issues because I don't know if they had, maybe you know a little bit more about that, Josh, where underneath the concrete that they didn't have necessarily the technology that you have today with the great plastics and things like that and chemicals that are using to create membranes. Do you know any more about that, Josh?
Well, with the really old structures, we don't have exactly like you say. They didn't have the same technology in regards to mitigating moisture. So we often will find that we have issues with moisture. Not only that, but the landscape around these buildings has changed so much that there's also a possibility that they're being exposed to more moisture than they were when they originally put in there, with all of the other infrastructure that's around them. So, yeah, we have to expect that when we go to these older facilities that we're also going to be dealing with environmental differences purely because of the time that this building was built in. So there's so many things. You can't really say, I love doing old concrete because it's easy, because there's so many other challenges and variables to be aware of prior to starting and what you're tackling. And you can't really necessarily say the same for new concrete either, despite the fact that we have a whole lot more technology, better tools for placement and all that sort of stuff. They're just a different set of challenges that we're dealing with. Neither is easier than the other, I don't think. As much as I'd love to be able to say, I only do old concrete because it's easy. One thing that I find very satisfying, that I think that leads us into the trap of thinking that old concrete is easy to polish, is that often we get to it and it's absolute mess. It's like it's like an absolute rust bucket of a car. You can see from one side through the other, and it's a massive process to get it back, to restore it, and to get it into as new condition. And when it's finished, it's like, wow, that's just like new concrete. I can't believe that we got this type of finish out of it. It's so satisfying, but it doesn't mean that it's better than new concrete. It just means that you've got it to as good as new. The conversion from what it was to what it is, the outcome is so much greater. And I think we can appreciate that a lot more than when we turn up with a floor that's new concrete installed with new technologies and techniques. The amount of change is not as significant.
So the other interesting, what's just coming to mind with some of the materials and things in old concrete, obviously different technologies, different times, different knowledge, and that's continually growing and it's going to keep on continue growing. Would you say the materials used back in, let's say, in the earlier days, still in the what would you call earlier days? I don't know. But when did concrete even come about? I know I watched a show recently about that they found cement, like concrete, in a structure that was a few hundred years old. So obviously concrete's been around for a long time. Yep. Would you say that the older sort of concretes that we're polishing still today have more organic materials that are easier polishable?
No, I'd say it's the opposite. Today we tend to mess with things a lot, and today we put things in the concrete that so the engineer's been given a specific requirement, and they're trying to meet a particular material strength and a budget and those sorts of things, and environmental pressures and that sort of stuff help to create the specification for the engineer or the concrete technologist. So he has the capacity. Overlooked, however, is this concrete is going to be here for 200 or 300 years. So have a lot of so many different types of including concrete polishing. We don't give a lot of thought put into that. So is the concrete that we're doing, it's part of the specification that's formed for the life cycle of this structure. Is there any consideration for the fact that this concrete at some point, maybe for the first 20 years or forever, will be mechanically polished concrete? And what are some of the things that we need to take into consideration to make that successful too? This is not something that concrete engineers are taught at university. This is something they tend to learn when we're all standing on site saying, this isn't working very well. And everyone's pointing the finger at each other. So as far as that's concerned, Daniel, I can't even remember the question.
The question's that old.
Sorry? How old is it? How old is it? It's very old and it's going to be around for a long time. But as far as the organicness of the materials, look, we are using a lot more recycled materials, which you could maybe say is conscious or falls into the same level of consciousness as organic, but we're using highly modified materials today in comparison to concrete when it was invented back in 1978, was it, Mike?
That's the year I was born. I was invented in 78, but if that's old, I guess that's old. I guess
that's when concrete got juicy. So to compare concrete today as far as the organic or naturalness of the materials to 100 years ago, no, certainly 100 years ago it was organic.
Good one, guys.
It really comes down to, you just got to know your materials, understand the process, do a sample, make sure it's successful, and set yourself up for success in a small bit at a time. Otherwise, you set yourself up for failure in a large bit at a time. We don't need that. No one needs that.
Absolutely.
And don't forget, it's organic and it is fantastic. Thank you.
Not plastic. Fantastic. Organic.
plastic.
Fantastic.
Organic fantastic. It's not plastic.
Well, we'll do some more work on that one.
He's got the beanie on today. He's feeling rappy.
Yeah.
and headphones.
It's a
Good one,
Wrapping up
guys.
plan.
It's time for my nap. I'm getting old. All this old talk. It's time for a nap, and then I'm going to go into the weekend and probably crack a beer. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Really good topic. Old concrete versus new concrete. So, as we mentioned before, run that sample, set yourself up for success, and remember the fundamentals. And until next week, we'll see you here.
Thank you, guys.
And don't forget,
I'm gonna get
have an organic one. Have an organic one.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
au revoir.
Ciao.
Uluru.